The purpose of this evening's event is to, in our conception this evening anyway, to connect ancient wisdom and modern psychological science in the same space. And that is what I would describe as the self-care space. So what can ancient wisdom tell us that is relevant to self-care in the modern day, and what can psychological science do to reinforce that learning, those timeless perspectives? This is, in general groundkeeping terms, I'm sure you know this anyway, but this is a confidential and a mutually respectful space. And I know that we will all recognize that and interact accordingly. The approach this evening is to ask our speakers a series of questions to draw out their knowledge so that they can share that with you. And that will hopefully deepen our understanding of each discipline and enrich our own personal self-care practices. I will, as the session goes on, as I'm sure Lisa will and Tim will, look at the chat box to see what kind of questions are coming in. And then that will give us the opportunity to kick off the Q&A at the end of the session with a series of questions already set up. But of course, you will also have the opportunity in that Q&A to come off the mic and ask a question directly. Okay. One other thing I need to add for context, I suppose, is why this conversation matters. I have my own perspective on that, rightly or wrongly, but I work in the field of well-being, so I'm conscious that recent studies in this field have emphasized the importance of things such as prevention. Is it possible for us to prevent apparently escalating mental health problems in our society? Other reports have emphasized the importance of focusing more upon well-being than conventional measures of whether our society is successful, or such as GDP or growth rates or employment levels or unemployment levels. And recently, a very interesting Harvard study of adult development, which is going on for approximately 80 years now, I think, has emphasized the paramount importance of relationships. So we are talking more now the language of well-being, of prevention, of relationships, and all very human concepts. And that's within the context of difficulties within healthcare systems across the world, particularly in the West, where there is increasingly limited clinical capacity, where pharmaceutical solutions can only do so much, where there are rising costs and difficulties around access. So all of these issues combined emphasize the increasing importance of self-care, which is something I believe that we learned the value of during the COVID pandemic. So in the context of all of that, what we're asking tonight is what self-care practices are meaningful. What self-care practices cost nothing but mean, if not everything, then a great deal. And tonight we'll have the opportunity to explore two schools of self-care, one ancient and one modern. Having said all of that, also I'll close by saying that self-care practices are clearly not a substitute for healthcare services, merely an important supplement to them. So that's my little bit over. Hopefully the introduction was useful to provide a little bit of context. I'd now like to hand over to our guest speakers tonight, Tim Lebon and Lisa Avery. First, to ask them to introduce themselves, to explain perhaps a little bit about their professional backgrounds, their achievements, and some of the challenges they've encountered in their professional work. So Tim, can I hand over to you in the first instance to give us some insight into who you are and what you do?
Thank you very much, Paul. And first of all, can everybody see and hear me okay? So just before we went on air, I had a headphone disaster. My headphone snapped, which was a real need for real-time stoicism. But all good Stoics have a contingency plan, and these are the reserve headphones. So, and I can see Britain is here. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So my name's Tim Lebon, and I am a CBT psychotherapist by profession. So that's what I generally do in the daytime. I work in the NHS in the UK, providing free therapy to people, particularly people who suffer from depression and anxiety. And as I say, I specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy, which, as many of you know, may be, well, you may not know actually, that it was inspired by Stoicism. So the people that invented CBT read about Stoicism and created CBT. So, and I'm in private practice in 3 days a week as well. So, but I'm not here really to talk about CBT so much as Stoicism, which is the second camp I've got a foot in. So I studied philosophy at university, and for me, philosophy has always been much more than just a kind of a subject that you study and then forget about when you're not studying it. For me, it's always been something that can inform how we live, to live wisely and to live flourishing lives. And I don't want to tell you my whole life story, but I'll just go back to about 12 years ago when something called modern Stoicism got going, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to join it, and I'm now its director of research, which means I help run studies to see whether Stoicism is effective. And I've also written a book on Stoicism, recently published, called 365 Ways to Be More Stoic. So this Stoicism started off as being something that I just thought was theoretically interesting, and partly because we found it to be so effective, and also I found it to be so helpful with myself and with clients as well. It's something that now inspires me, and I aspire to be a good Stoic. I'm not sure I always hit the mark, but that is what I aspire to be. And the third camp I've got a foot in is positive psychology, because I've written another book, Achieve Your Potential with Positive Psychology, and I teach positive psychology. And so my passion is to help people and to provide resources that help people combine those three disciplines, really: philosophy, psychology, and philosophy. Or therapy. If I said philosophy twice, that might be where my heart is, I guess. So, and the challenge, well, there's lots of challenges on the way, but one challenge is finding the right setting for people who share the same viewpoint, that certainly both philosophy and psychology can bring things to the show. It's become so specialized now, hasn't it, that you get people. It's not so hard to find people interested in, say, Stoicism. It's not so hard to find people who are interested in positive psychology. To find people who are interested in both and open to them both informing each other is really wonderful. So I'd really like to thank you, Paul and Lisa and Brittany and Eve, who isn't present but is much missed here, to invite me to this. I'm very excited about what we're going to do today.
You're very welcome, Tim. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm very grateful for your time. Lisa, could I also then ask you to, give us some of your professional background, just as Tim has done?
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. And hi to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're super excited and we appreciate your presence. So I'm Lisa Avery and I'm a positive psychologist. And that means that I work with positive psychology, which for those of you who may not be so familiar, this is the branch of psychology which deals with optimal human functioning. So in other words, how can I live my best life? And I'm super passionate about this because I've been really fortunate to work with a fairly vast array of settings. So from the NHS to universities and schools and colleges, to government and also some charities. Pretty much this is so universally applicable and I believe so powerful in all of these settings. It really asks people some very simple questions, but the answers that these questions can generate, I think, are fairly profound. And that's why I love it, because it's very unpretentious, it's very simple, it's very easy in so many ways, yet it can yield very profound insights. And that's why I really love it. In terms of challenges, there have been, again, so many, because this is something that really came about around 25 years ago officially. I personally believe, and I know Paul really endorses this too, that humanistic psychology had a major part to play. So actually, I think this has been going on for so much longer. But officially, the term positive psychology, I believe, came to be around the year 2000, when Martin Seligman, head of the American Psychological Association, asked the question of why is it that everybody asks what's wrong with people? How about if we change the lens and ask, what is right with people and how can we get so much more of this. And this is such a powerfully positive angle to view human nature through. And many of the people that I work with, especially young, disengaged people, they've never had anybody ask this question to them and of them before. So whether we're speaking about young people or people in companies, I believe that there are questions here that we can all ask of ourselves that can be really useful and powerful. But in terms of the challenges, because this has been quite a new science, a new branch of psychology, at times it's been difficult to convey the value and importance of this. All of that is pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we understand more than ever the value and the need for self-care, for mental health, for an awareness of this, and times are changing, fortunately. It's a shame it's taken a pandemic to get to this place, but better late than never. That would be me in a nutshell, and back over to Paul, I think.
That's wonderful, Lisa. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for that excellent introduction, and Tim too, of course. So I'd like to move things on to the kind of conversational stage now and engage you both in well, first I'd like to engage you in I suppose, some misconceptions around both Stoicism and positive psychology. I thought that would be an interesting way into each subject. So I scrawled some notes in preparation for this session because I'm a Stoic practitioner myself, but I am conscious of the way Stoicism is sometimes perceived and misconceived by many. But if I were to try and describe a kind of classic misconception around Stoicism, I would mention words or terms such as solitary, emotionally repressed, unfeeling, disconnected from the concerns of fellow men and women. I know that's unfair as a Stoic. Nonetheless, I think it does capture some of the spirit of the misconceptions around Stoicism. Tim, how would you respond to someone whose idea of Stoicism was expressed in that way?
Well, I think there's let's blame the English language, shall we, rather than the person who's got that misconception. Because in the English language, if you look it up in the dictionary, Stoicism with a lowercase s does kind of mean exactly what you've described. You know, we hear things like the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II being quite stoic, but which doesn't mean that she embraced the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and the ancient Greeks and Romans. It meant that she put up with things without complaining too much. So lowercase Stoicism with a small s, does kind of mean that thing. But really importantly, the philosophy of Stoicism, inspired by ancient Greeks and Romans and carried forward in this century by a number of modern Stoics, has got absolutely nothing to do with that. And I think that's so important, I'm going to repeat it. It's got nothing to do with it. And in fact, we know that because I mentioned that we do research on Stoicism, and we've got a scale that measures how Stoic one is in the true sense of the word. Other people have devised scales which measure the kind of stiff upper lip Stoicism, as I like to call it. And guess what the correlation was between those two scales? Guess what they were? It was 0, or perhaps even slightly negative. So they had got nothing to do with each other. So that is the biggest misconception. And can I just offer another misconception, Paul, which is that Stoicism is only for times when you're in real distress. And of course, that is often the time that people will turn to Stoicism. And it's not to say that Stoicism can't be really helpful when we hit rock bottom or something really terrible happens to us. But I think it's much more helpful to think of Stoicism as a philosophy that builds resilience and also that brings well-being in the fullest sense of the word. And I'm sure we'll come on to what well-being and happiness really means. So I think that's a slightly more subtle misconception. That, once we get over the idea that Stoicism isn't about repressing emotions and being isolated, I think we need to think of Stoicism actually as a positive psychology, as well as a positive philosophy.
That's really helpful and enlightening. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Could you perhaps deal with a further misconception, if indeed it is a misconception? I know from observing lots of kind of Stoic material that's available online that often, I think you by reading that material, it's often it's excellent material, but often you might get the impression that Stoicism is merely a form of self-improvement. And it's really about the self, it's about the individual. Is there more to Stoicism than that?
Absolutely. And as you said, Paul, I think a lot of people that have written about Stoicism, I was going to say in Silicon Valley, perhaps that's a bit unfair, but there's certainly a brand of Stoicism which is largely about self-improvement, in the sense of being able to be successful in life, and being successful regardless of anything that goes wrong. But I think what's really important, and what is sometimes missed out by those presentations of Stoicism, is the ethical dimension. The idea that for the Stoics, true Stoics, it's about being the best version of yourself, not just being a successful entrepreneur, although you might be, but being a good person, being a happy person and a good person. And that, as I'm sure we'll come on to later, means cultivating the virtues, including that of justice and caring and kindness.
That's excellent, Tim, because it gives us more of an insight into the social dimension of Stoicism. Is there anything that you can offer from the philosophy that takes that a little bit further? Are there, I know that there are, so I don't know why I'm asking the question. Are there concepts within Stoicism that emphasize our responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to others?
Well, as I said, the virtue of justice fully encompasses that, but that might not be obvious either, because we think of justice as just being about fairness, whereas actually it's broader than that. It includes what we might think of as humanity, love, kindness. So that's one answer. Also, something that I prepared earlier, and we'll come on to, I think, is about Hierocles and his circles of concern, which is rather similar to the idea of Buddhist loving kindness, and the idea that we extend our concern quite deliberately beyond ourselves to those outside ourselves. And a third idea is that of oikiosis. Don't ask me to spell it, although I probably could. Don't ask me. So oikiosis, it's a kind of untranslatable word, but for me, it's Greek. What it actually translates into in practical terms is the idea of moral progress, and that we might start off being self-interested and self-concerned. We've got to be, otherwise we wouldn't survive. And in teenage years, we think of gosh, if I think of myself, the teenage version of myself, and you shudder sometimes. But what's quite nice is that the Stoics say, well, this is all quite natural, because as we grow in years, we can also grow ethically. And that's in terms of, there's two dimensions of that. One is in terms of rationality. And as I'm sure the positive psychologists and scientists in the room can tell us, that our brains actually don't get fully developed until we're in our 20s or 30s, or in some cases, like my own, probably much later. So rationally, we grow, and also socially, we have the potential to grow and extend our concern. And the Stoics think that that's what we will naturally do as human beings if certain societies or certain influences don't stop that happening. So I think that's a really interesting concept, because it gives us hope that we can become better versions of ourselves, and we could do that via the Stoic practices.
That's wonderful, Tim. I really appreciate you expanding upon those concepts. Yeah, I'm now more hopeful that I will eventually evolve in the way that you're suggesting.
I'm going to try and spell oikiosis in the chat. I might get it wrong, you see.
You are feeling confident this evening, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right, I think with your permission, Tim, I will now switch focus to Lisa and ask her to deal with some misconceptions that exist around the term positive psychology. I know that Lisa will be able to help us deal with those misconceptions. So again, I just made some notes in advance of this session, or immediately before the session, in fact, Lisa. I know I've mentioned some of these things to you previously, but does the term positive psychologist conjure up someone who's permanently smiling, always positive in every situation, and if I may say so, perhaps in denial about life's often painful realities?
Brilliant question, Paul. And actually, the fact that I do smile a lot, I think, can be very misleading to people, because positive psychology, it isn't just about positive emotions. It isn't some pink and fluffy, happy, clappy branch of psychology. In fact, there's so much research that's behind this. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that positive psychology welcomes the full range of human emotions, the full human experience. Everything can come to the table. You know, you may have heard the term toxic positivity. And I think there is a real danger that when we try to be too positive, we're not doing justice to a person's real lived experience. You know, sadly, a few months ago, my grandma died, and yes, she was 86 years old, 87 years old at the time. But all too many people were very quick to say, well, she had a good life, good innings. And I know that they were coming from the right place, but that didn't sit with me in my moment of grief and sadness, just as I needed those people to do at that time. And that is because, and that is not their fault, you know, it's society's fault for oftentimes giving too much value and importance and congratulating people who can stay positive, can stay happy. But it's not the normal, natural response at every single moment of life. And for this reason, I think positive psychology now more than ever is able to deal with the negative and the positive, in inverted commas, at the very same time, accepting that every single emotion that has survived evolution has survived for a reason and provides a very important function to human beings. So positive psychology welcomes both the positive and the so-called negative as part of a full range of human experience. What's also true is that positive psychology has two real focuses, I believe. That is on the hedonic approach to happiness, so finding happiness through pleasure, through good times, but also the eudaimonic. So it also focuses on a deeper sense of purpose, meaning, overcoming adversity and looking for the good in that, being able to transcend oneself in order to make a bit of a difference in this world. So that's why I really love positive psychology, especially second wave, which really focuses more on the deeper, darker stuff, which is actually the bit that I love the most and I feel has the greatest impact when exploring in depth. So not pink, not fluffy, not happy clappy, far from it. That being said, it does look for really positive, proactive ways to enhance your well-being on a daily basis. So I feel that if we can free ourselves of and from the negative through expressing our true lived experience, once we get that level of liberation, we can begin to welcome in the positive. But again, we never get to that destination. It's an ongoing process. Does that answer your question, Paul?
That's a very good answer, Lisa. Thank you. I was struck by your reference to the eudaimonic there during the course of your description of positive psychology, and that is potentially where there is the most obvious alignment between this modern school of psychological science and Stoic philosophy. Because my Greek is wonderful, but my understanding of the term eudaimonic or eudaimonia is human happiness, human flourishing, which is, thanks, Tim has very kindly spelt it for us. It's our human dictionary and thesaurus this evening. That's wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Yes, the ultimate aspiration, I suppose, of both that ancient philosophical wisdom and this modern school of psychology, flourishing, but flourishing more importantly in adverse circumstances. Excellent. Again, a great description of your discipline. It's my view, and you don't have to share it, that the term positive psychology is unhelpful. If you could rename positive psychology, what would you call it?
I always describe it as the science of optimal human functioning, because it is essentially how to live optimally, how to live your best possible life. I understand it's not quite so catchy and cute. If anybody has any better suggestions, please feel free to type into the chat box here. That'd be very welcome.
I do have a view. I mean, when I'm asked to explain positive psychology, often, ironically, to psychologists who will perhaps come from a more clinical perspective, the way I describe it is preventative psychology. Would that be a fair description?
I think so, because many of the people I work with, some suffer from perhaps mild anxiety or mild depression. Just post-COVID, many of the young people I work with just don't really know what to do with their lives. Is that a disorder? I wouldn't say so. Is it human angst? Is it existential angst? Absolutely. So I agree that positive psychology in the sense that it helps people explore the deeper, important questions around self, around identity, around purpose, that perhaps no other space in this world really offers that exploration of. I'm not sure, maybe Tim would argue that this is a part of his philosophy too, but I believe preventative could be a good description, because essentially you're arming people with an understanding of their thoughts, their feelings, their actions, so that they can empower themselves and make better decisions, I'd say. Would you agree with that, Paul and Tim?
Well, I'm more interested in Tim's response than my own. Tim, do you have a view on that?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting, because being a cognitive behavioral therapist, if someone's got a serious case of depression or anxiety, then I would go to the evidence base for that. I mean, we can have discussions about whether CBT is the best therapy or not, but the idea being that CBT rather than positive psychology, or indeed Stoicism, if someone has got a psychological disorder. And I would see actually Stoicism and positive psychology as being in the same space, really, as being preventative. And the distinction might be that positive psychology is more drawn into science and experiments and research and models of psychological models of human beings, and Stoicism is more drawn from philosophy. But I think that they're both probably in the same space of being preventative.
Thank you, Tim. That's excellent. I'm not going to attempt to expand upon what Tim has just said. I think it's a great response. I'd like to move us on slightly now, if that's okay. In a more, because of course I find, like lots of people, I find the theory behind these things fascinating, but I'm also interested in the practical application of the theory. So I'm conscious that, we've all been through a lot wherever we are in the world. We've all been through a lot in recent years. With the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, in Europe, of course, we're very conscious that there's a European war for the first time in many, many decades. And also, I think, globally, there is a cost of living crisis. So these are very demanding, anxiety-inducing, stressful times. So I'm interested in what Stoic philosophy and positive psychology can do at a very practical level for someone who's experiencing adversity, not the kind of global examples I've just offered, but let's bring it down to an individual level. If I were to lose my job, for example, in the midst of all this a turmoil, if I were to lose my job, which is the source, perhaps, well, definitely of my financial security, my self-esteem, perhaps even my identity, how could an ancient philosophy or a modern form of psychological science help me? Tim, can I ask you the question in the first instance? What, in that very practical scenario, could Stoicism do for me to stop me falling into despair?
Yeah, and it might be helpful for me to show a picture, if I may. which is a kind of framework that I find helpful to kind of give an overview of what Stoicism is. I'm not going to talk through all of this, but that's the is it gone? Can you see my screen with someone wondering whether to go into an elevator? Now, it's called a Stoic elevator because there are 5 levels, and you can choose whether you get into the elevator in the first place, and then you can choose at what stage you want to get off. So that's one sense why it's an elevator. And the second sense is that it elevates you to a higher level of well-being and wisdom, or that's the Stoic claim anyway. So I'm going to run through at least the first 3 levels, I think, and then answer Paul's question about what if you'd lost your job. So, and what I've done is I've put there is a bit of jargon in Stoicism, I'm afraid. So I've put the English version here and the jargon version there. So we start off with controlling the controllables, known more officially as the dichotomy of control in Stoicism. And here, so I've lost my job. I can't control that. That's happened. And there's no point me dwelling on why that's happened and all the things I've done wrong. That's what we call rumination in cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's something very much associated with depression. And neither is there any point in me overthinking about what might happen in the future, which sets us up for worry, which is another big psychological problem. So we can't control what's happened in the past. We can't fully control what's going to happen in the future. But really crucially, what we've got direct control over, that Stoicism really puts its finger on quite beautifully, I think, are 2 things. Only 2 things, really. Our attitude, or our way of thinking about it, and our behavior, our voluntary behavior. So for instance, I've lost my job. We know what I don't do. I don't ruminate or worry or criticize lots of other people. I think about what is the best attitude I can take, and I think about what is my best behavior. Now, what is my best attitude probably brings us on to the second level, if we decide we want to go up a level, which is, in English, being the best versions of ourselves, in Stoic jargon, developing the virtues. And I came across someone the other day who really hated this term virtues. And I had what started off as being a friendly conversation, but they really didn't like it. And I said, then I hate the virtues. Just think of a virtuoso in, say, playing the violin. Isn't that a good thing? They're just becoming excellent. That's what the word arete in Greek means. It means excellent. And they didn't like that. They said, no, virtues. I just hate the idea. And I said, well, it's just about being a good human being. And they said, no, I don't like this idea that you've got to be a good human being. So anyway, but I hope for most people, this idea that we can develop qualities that are good for us and good for the world, and that those 2 generally go together, is an interesting notion. And so, and it's certainly something that I think is really key to Stoicism. And in fact, one of the best things about Stoicism is that it promotes us to think about the virtues and how to develop the virtues. So coming back to your question about I've lost my job, I would ask, what virtues do I need in this situation? And it would depend on my personality and the situation. But I'd suggest I might need patience. I might need proactivity. I might need wisdom. I might need a kind of courage, actually, to ask people for help, or to send my CV off to lots of places. So this takes us quite a long way if we think about it. You know, the version of me that is non-Stoic might spend all my time thinking about stuff I can't control, like why this has gone wrong or what's going to happen in the future outside my control. The Stoic version of me is focusing on my behavior and my attitude, and then thinking about the virtues I need and trying to put them into practice. And the third level is actually really important as well, because we face moment-to-moment challenges, don't we? It might be a bill coming in this case. And so in common, I guess, understanding, we think that there's an event and then there's our emotions. So the bill coming in causes me to be anxious. We say that, don't we? The bill made me anxious. The great insight of Epictetus, one of the leading Stoics, is that it's not events that impact so much as our interpretation of events, which is the bit of Stoicism that the cognitive behavioral therapists came and ran with. So there's this thing called Stoic mindfulness, which is about noticing our judgments in real time when they happen, and then deciding what we do with them. And we could decide that they're not realistic, our judgments, our snap judgments, if you like. We might be catastrophizing, we might be jumping to conclusions. And so, you know, my snap judgment when the bill comes in is, oh my God, I'm going to be evicted. But actually, is that really true? Is there a way that I can carry on living where I am? Now, there's more to Stoicism than that, because I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will mention number 4 here because it is really important. And this is the idea that actually what matters most is preserving and prioritizing your character, so that even if I did have to move house, then as long as I retained my integrity and my character, it couldn't really harm me. So, and this is a thought that can keep us strong when all kinds of adversities that happen to us. The idea that no matter what happens, as long as we retain our character, then we are doing what we can, and that is enough. So I'll end there, because I know that Lisa's got a lot to add about what positive psychology can answer this. But I hope that's an initial answer to my understanding of what Stoicism is, and also how it could help someone when they've lost their job.
Perfect. So,
sorry to interrupt, Lisa. I just wanted to thank Tim for that. I thought that was wonderful and very insightful and practical. So please, same question over to you.
perfect, thank you. So positive psychology, as I mentioned before, I think can be really helpful in helping people explore actually who they are. So who they are at their best specifically. And this is why when you lose your job, which I think oftentimes forms a part of our identity, it can be really useful to do something called the VIA, Values in Action Signature Strand Survey. I know that there are people on the call from a positive psychology background, so I know you'll be very familiar with this already. But the VIA, Values in Action Signature Strand Survey, it's a resource that you can find from the University of Pennsylvania's website, and it's really wonderful. There are 240 questions, so it does take 20-25 minutes or so to complete it. But upon completion, you'll be given a list of your 24 character strands. However, it's the top 5 character strands that are particularly significant here. These are known as your signature strands, as unique to you in their order and their salience as your own personal signature. And once you get an idea of what your top 5 character strands are, you can begin to think how you can use these strands in novel ways, how you can enhance these strands, because it's this idea from positive psychology that you will truly shine when you do that which you already do well. So when you excel in that which you're naturally already quite good at. So by identifying what our top 5 character strands are, I think it can be really reaffirming and reassuring as to who we are, and also what matters to us in terms of our values, because our strengths are nothing but a vehicle through which we serve our values. That's why they're known as values in action. So I think that for me, the first place to start, it's, well, actually, who am I? What am I good at? What matters to me? And that's why we begin with character strengths and a bit of an exploration around values. When we get an idea of who we are at our best, for me, it's then time to start re-envisioning our lives moving forwards. And there's an exercise that I really love, and I'm so sorry because my cat is in the kitchen digging and I hope he stops really soon. There's an exercise that I really love, which is called the Best Possible Self Exercise by Dr. Laura King. And she asked people to take 3 consecutive days, 20 minutes each day, and she asked them to write about their best possible future. Okay, so you would use the present tense and you would write about your life as it was happening at that moment in time. I'm so sorry, it's so distracting. He literally never does this, and for some reason is having a bit of a party in the kitchen. Hopefully it's going to stop any second. You would write about your life in the present tense, but like it's already happening now, but obviously imagining the future that you like. The first day you do this, I think it can be quite hard for people. People stay, kind of a little bit constrained, a little bit uncomfortable. But when you begin to put words to the future that you'd really like, in theory, you gain some clarity, you gain some motivation, you gain those positive emotions. And this is really empowering at a time of disengagement, perhaps having lost a little bit of self-confidence. To be able to boost your positive emotions at this time is particularly useful, because we know that when people are experiencing positive emotions, they're more open, they're more creative in their thinking, and they're more collaborative with other human beings. So any which way that you can at that moment boost those positive emotions, we know that it's going to lead to better outcomes. So once you've explored your strengths and your values, and you've started to create a future vision towards which you can move, at that moment, I think it's also really useful to begin to explore the psychology of hope and optimism, because oftentimes when things go wrong, we can truly catastrophize, just as I'm about to do now with my cat. It's this idea that the 3 Ps of optimism versus pessimism. When something goes wrong, how can you challenge yourself and ask, how is this not entirely personal? So the first P, it's the personal or personalization. How can I see that this is not pervasive? It's not going to affect every single aspect of life. And how can I see that this is not permanent? And I know that Tim will speak about this a little more perhaps later. But if we're able to take ourselves through the 3 Ps of optimism versus pessimism, that can be really helpful too. And the final thing that I was going to add, if I may, when we know our strengths, we have created a bit of a future vision to move towards, we're able to use the 3 Ps of optimism versus pessimism. The other thing is to know that the central framework to positive psychology, it's known as PERMA, it's an acronym, which is PERMA, and it says that human beings need 5 things to thrive. Those are the positive emotions I've just mentioned, sense of engagement. So when you are just in the zone, when what you're doing, it's neither too easy nor too difficult, but presents an optimal challenge to your skill set. In those moments, people stop all rumination, they lose all worry and sense of self, and they are just in flow with the moment. And that's a powerfully positive state for human beings to access. So when you have your positive emotions and your engagement, the next thing we need are positive relationships. So it's the R for relationships. The greatest predictor to human relationships, the quality and longevity of those relationships, it is our ability to actively, constructively respond. So if I share some good news with you, I say, guys, I've just got a promotion at work. Your ability to hold that space for me, to congratulate me, but not only congratulate me, move beyond this and ask me questions, show genuine curiosity and interest, that will predict the quality and longevity of our relationship, those kind of micro moments of connection. Then we have the M for meaning. So our ability to transcend ourselves and give back to people and really connect with people. Then the A for accomplishment, achieving our goals. If we're able to take small steps on a daily basis to access a little more of each of these 5 things, then I think we're truly winning, and we'll get back into that positive mindset and confidence and self-belief. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer. I hope that was slightly helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Paul, I think you're on mute.
How many times am I going to do that before I get it right? Before I finally remember to unmute myself? From my perspective, I thought that was extremely useful. And again, very practical, just like Tim's Stoic perspective. What I got a sense of from listening to you both speak is that there are rich resources to be used to contend with adversity, should that be on a societal scale in relation to things such as a pandemic, but also in a more practical, everyday sense, where adversity can visit us in the form of a job loss or a bereavement or some other form of very familiar adversity. So from my point of view, that was excellent. I'm very grateful for you both for sharing your perspectives, and like other members of the audience, I'm sure I will continue to reflect upon what you've said and learn from it. Thank you ever so much. I'm conscious that we got one or two questions still to go through here, and I do want to get to the stage where people can ask questions of their own, but I would like to move us along slightly now to a point where hopefully we combine the two perspectives a little bit more to see whether they've got anything to improve each other, I suppose, which is probably a slightly unfair thing for me to expect you both to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I might as well be upfront about it. So I suppose my question at this stage is to you both. Tim, what you believe Stoicism can add to Lisa's description of positive psychology and what it's all about. And I know you have a high level of awareness of positive psychology, so hopefully that question won't pose too many challenges. And Lisa, then I would like to ask you the same question. What does the modern science of positive psychology have to offer a wisdom tradition that's been in existence for 2,300 years? No pressure. Tim, perhaps you'd like to start?
So first of all, thank you, Lisa, for putting positive psychology so articulately in a few minutes. One of the students on the courses I teach in positive psychology is on the call tonight. So hello, Tejas. And I'm a bit embarrassed that Tejas will say, hey, why have you taken 10 weeks to tell us what Lisa told us in 5 minutes? But anyway, thank you, Lisa, for that. It's all good. I've forgotten what the question was now. Oh yeah, what can Stoicism add to positive psychology? Now, this is a really difficult question, particularly as I see there are some eminent positive psychologists on this call, because there's always a risk of oversimplifying something that you're contrasting yourself with. It's what we all do, isn't it? Well, certainly people that write articles in academic journals, they say the problem with, I don't know, psychoanalysis or CBT is this, and my theory does this instead. So with that, with the risk that I might be doing that, put out there, I want to say that there are at least two things that Stoicism can add. The safe thing that I don't think runs any risk is to say that it's a lot of beautiful words, writings from Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. Unfortunately, we've lost the writings of most of the writings of the earlier Greek Stoics. So those of you who haven't yet read any of those great authors, do so. They're easy to read. They're easily available. And so you've got, in other words, you've got a wealth of insight into the human condition and how best to respond to it. And you've got a wealth of exercises, practical, what we'd call interventions in positive psychology. These people, they didn't just make them up and put them like in a self-help book. They would, this went on for 500 years or more, people trying them out, seeing that they were helpful, and then they became part of Stoicism. So the uncontroversial answer is that Stoicism is a treasure chest of ideas and interventions that can be a part of positive psychology, and then positive psychology can come and test them out and see which ones work, which is fantastic. The other answer I want to give, which, as I say, runs a risk of perhaps simplifying or misrepresenting positive psychology, is that sometimes you'll see the psychology of strengths being represented as being about focusing on your top strengths. And there is a little bit of a danger of that if it's not balanced with wisdom, which for Stoics, wisdom is the foundational strength or virtue. And without wisdom, everything else is a little bit precarious. So my example would be, I recently traveled on a plane, and imagine there'd been a little bit of a noise coming out of the plane, and imagine that the pilot's top strength was optimism. And if he was kind of taking an oversimplistic view of this idea of using his top strength more, he might say, aha, I need to use my optimism strengths here. I'm going to ignore that noise coming out of the plane. And the point is, I wouldn't want him to be my pilot. And that might sound like a silly example, but I think all the strengths can be overused or misused. Even kindness, if you're in an abusive relationship, you have to think what is wise as well. Now, I know that some positive psychologists have talked about the misuse and overuses of strengths, but I think that isn't always emphasized, and it's where Stoicism, with its emphasis on wisdom, is really important. Related to that, I loved your bringing PERMA into it, because I think PERMA is such a great framework for well-being. But Martin Lebon himself admitted that Osama bin Laden could have had PERMA, because PERMA it's subjective. It's whether you've got a sense of meaning, a sense of engagement, a sense of whether you've got positive relationships. And so it lacks a moral compass, in other words. And I think that's what Stoicism brings to the show. Now, I know that psychologists want to get away from moralizing and telling people what to do. I think this is where we could have an interesting dialogue between the two disciplines, because from a Stoic point of view, I think the Stoic would say, well, actually, there are some ways of being that are more conducive to being a better human being, and that would be living according to the virtues. And so if we want a truly rich view of what human flourishing or well-being is, we've got to include it. We've got to include that moral dimension. There ends the sermon.
It was a very good sermon, Tim. Thank you. If I understood what you were saying to us correctly, if I could summarize your perspective, there was an emphasis upon beautiful words. And I don't think the value of that should be underestimated. Having read Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, I can testify how beautiful their language is, and how important that beauty is, the lyrical dimension of Stoicism. You describe it also as a treasure chest of ideas. I certainly agree with that. And then you put the emphasis upon the importance of wisdom, and you give us a very good and practical example of what you mean by that. And then emphasize the ethical dimension, which I would agree is also very important. Thank you, Tim. I thought that was excellent. Lisa, can I now ask you the same question? What can positive psychology offer to Stoicism?
Absolutely. I'll give this a go, but I have to say I will do no justice to this as Tim just did. Tim was amazing there. I'm afraid I don't have the same depth of knowledge around Stoicism, but from what I've heard tonight and from my limited knowledge, I would first of all like to say that I wholeheartedly agree with Tim in the sense of having a moral compass, I think, is really significant. And Dr. Susan David, for anybody who isn't familiar, does a lot of work around values, values-driven behavior. And she asks a wonderful question. She said, every time you're about to think something, do something, or say something, you need to ask yourself if what you're about to say, do, or think is going to take you closer or further away from the person that you want to be. But I agree that in order to know who that person is, you probably do have to do the kind of work that Tim's been talking about. So I would just wanted to add that because I think that's really a very good point. In terms of what positive psychology can bring to the table, as Tim made me aware the other day, we have so much research, we have an evidence-based work, treasure trove in and of itself to draw upon. And I guess that's the main thing that positive psychology can bring. There are so many practical interventions from positive psychology that I'm happy to share in any which way I can. Maybe later we can send out some references that could be useful. So besides this, I think Tim made an interesting point, if I noted this down correctly, when he said Stoicism is about feeling good by doing good. Please correct me if I'm inaccurate in that. It's the goodness of your character, which in turn helps you feel good about who you are and increases your well-being. I guess my question is, what is the role of hedonia within Stoicism? What about having fun, seeking pleasure just for the sake of that? Does it always have to be so deep and profound and meaningful? Can we just have a bit of fun and frivolity? I don't know. This is a question I would ask of you lovely people who know so much more about Stoicism. Where is the place for fun, frivolity, without any consequential thinking as to what this means in terms of character, as long as you're not doing harm? What else do I have to say about this? I absolutely agree with Tim that strengths, maybe in positive psychology, we can shine too much of a light on what a person does well to the point of detriment. Do we need more conscience within positive psychology? Hang on, now I'm arguing for the other team. Maybe Paul and Tim, you can help me a little bit here. I'm not sure if I know enough about Stoicism to add more to the debate at this point than that. Was there anything I missed, Tim? You have both hats, so you could probably help me out.
I think that's a great answer, Lisa. I think the thing that I would elaborate on when you said about the research of positive psychology, sometimes when we run Stoic Week, and people that's a week in October where an organization called Modern Stoicism invites people to live like a Stoic for a week, and they get a free book and exercise to do, and we talk about the virtues, and the question that often comes up is, well, how do I become more courageous? How do I become more self-controlled or temperate? And I think that's where positive psychology can add something. Because of course, Stoics have said they've got lots of ideas about how to be more courageous, etc. But I think contemporary psychology in general has done quite a lot of research into these things. And I think that can bolster some Stoic ideas and provide some very concrete answers. And so when I was writing my book on Stoicism recently, I decided to devote a whole chapter to each of the virtues and to combine Stoic ideas with positive psychology ideas. And one of the things that I didn't know quite how they would mesh, but I found that often the seeds of the ideas that have been shown to be true were actually there in Stoicism. So I'll just give one example. In many people listening might be aware of the concept of accountability partner, which is if you want to achieve something, perhaps something that involves courage or self-control, you get someone, an accountability partner, who you're going to report back to about how you're doing on your, I don't know, your quest to do 10,000 steps a day or whatever virtuous thing it is. Now, Epictetus didn't use the term accountability partner, but what he did say was choose your company wisely. And there's this lovely passage where he talks about soot, and how if you mix with people covered in soot, you're likely to be covered in soot yourself. And if you think about someone that's, say, trying to recover from an alcohol problem, they would be advised to be very cautious about who they mixed with, because if it's their old drinking buddies, it's going to be very hard for them to stay on the right path. So I love that. I love the way that the two disciplines can inform each other.
That was wonderful. Thank you for stepping in there and adding that additional dimension to the debate, Tim. Much appreciated. To go back to what Lisa had to say, I think what came across very strongly was evidence. It's as a school of psychology, of course, it must be evidence-based. Conclusion must be evidence-based. So the scientific dimension is incredibly important. I feel I need to return to the subject of fun somehow. I don't know how to respond in a way that does service to Stoicism, but I would say that, and I'm probably stretching it here until will tell me off, but Stoicism is big on pro-social behavior, and fun is a form of pro-social behavior, I would suggest, and that's the best I can do.
Can I mention zest there? I don't think I've mentioned zest yet today.
You're the king of zest. You're the
king of zest. So look at the Stoics on this call today, aren't we zestful? But when we did research on what the association was between Stoicism and various strengths, we were expecting things like perseverance and wisdom to come out top, and they did quite well. Actually, so did other things like optimism. But the top one was zest, which surprised us. So zest meaning enthusiasm and vigor. So that's, I think we need to remember that this idea of Stoics as being statues and doer is not quite right. there is an interesting debate here, though. I can't pretend that there isn't a difference between certainly the hedonistic forms of well-being and Stoicism. In that elevator I put up earlier, it did say that virtue is more important than anything else. So if you've got a choice between doing the right thing and doing something that's fun, the Stoic says do the right thing every time. But what they would also add is, well, have fun if it doesn't do any harm.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. That was a really interesting exchange. I certainly learned a lot from it. I only one more question for you both before we move on to further information and Q&A. And it seems an apt question. I think the context of the times we find ourselves living in. Could you both perhaps offer the audience a hopeful note from your respective disciplines, offer us some inspiration from Stoicism for these difficult and occasionally very dark times, and likewise from positive psychology? Tim, perhaps you'd like to start again?
Done. I did the mute thing there. Yeah, it's my second picture. And so we move on to Hierocles' circles of concern. So this is a later Stoic, and it's mind-blowing, this, when I first came across it, because it's so different from the caricature of Stoicism, which is about, you know, Stoic being just concerned about themselves and their own kind of not having any negative emotions. And relating it to Paul's question is you know, who was it that said that all you need is love? John Lennon, perhaps. You know, well, that might be a slight overstatement, but it would go a long way, wouldn't it, if we were more caring towards other people? And there's this idea of cosmopolitanism. It was on the fifth level of the elevator in my framework. The idea that we are all citizens of the world, and that we should treat other people just like ourselves, is very much there in Stoicism. So just very briefly to say what this means, it's that we should aim to bring the outer circles closer to us. So you know, we might think of treating our own family well. We should think of extending that same care to friends, and similarly strangers to treat as we might colleagues. And they would do this in a very practical way by actually calling friends brother or something like that, which I think as kind of that kind of idea has continued in some other circles as well. And in this particular modern Stoic version of it, we've actually got concern for the whole planet, so an environmental concern as well, which is really crucial. So I think the more that we can do this, obviously I talked about oikeiosis earlier. We all have a tendency, I think, I know I do, to start with that person there right in the center, but it's the idea that we can choose to think more objectively and impartially, and extend our, not just our concern, but also our care towards the wider world.
Excellent, Tim, thank you. What I was thinking when looking at that model there was how contrary it is to the way we're living at present. It does seem as if we're going through a period of time where things are very divisive and very polarized and very black and white, but within the model of Stoicism you've offered us there's perhaps an indication that an alternative is possible and preferable. So thank you so much for that. Lisa, could I now impose upon you and to answer the same question, please?
Yes, please. So thank you. I would say, in light of all the hard times that we've been through in the last few years, there's something from positive psychology that I learned a good few years ago, which really helped me on a daily basis. And that was understanding that our brain has a negativity bias. So where there's good or bad in this life, we will always first focus on the so-called bad, because that is what can endanger our emotional, psychological, or even physical survival. So just being aware that on a daily basis, our mind will go towards the bad, will focus more on the bad, on the negative than the good, That conscious awareness can really help us begin to retrain our brains slightly. Now, how can we do this? There is a really simple way, and that is through gratitude. And gratitude is one of the simplest, but I think most powerful and effective ways to retrain that negativity bias. So at the end of each day, simply asking yourself, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for today? However seemingly small and insignificant, or else however profound. You know, a sunrise in the morning, perhaps a chat with a colleague at work. Just those moments, those micro moments of what Barbara Fredrickson called love and connection, micro moments of love and connection can be a real rich source of gratitude to draw upon. So we have gratitude to help reprogram this negativity bias of the brain. So too, I think, just to come back to what Paul said at the very start, I think in a world where bad things do happen and where our minds will always veer towards the negative, we've got to begin to focus on the good around us. And oftentimes that exists within our social connections. So as Paul said at the very beginning, there is no greater predictor to a human's well-being, as we know from the Harvard Grant study of 80 years, I think Paul said, than the quality of a few close relationships to that person. If relationships are indeed so incredibly important, more so than IQ, more so than social status, more so than absolutely anything, how can we value and nurture those close relationships? And again, it doesn't even have to be with people we see every day. It can be people that we see in the street. We know that when a human being experiences those micro moments of love and connection, even with the person in Starbucks selling you your coffee, just those 1 or 2 moments of connection, our biochemistry starts to align, our hearts start to beat at the same rhythm. This is so good for human beings. We know that human beings, when they feel a sense of exclusion, there's a really interesting study with children, and one child is deliberately excluded on a computer game and doesn't receive the ball in a game of football, I think it is. That same child's brain is activated in the same way as if he were receiving physical pain. So physical pain, that is the result of social exclusion. We need to belong, we yearn to belong. And I think that whatever we can do on a daily basis, in however small a way, to reach out and connect with other human beings, we feel so much better. Again, it's about giving to other people whatever we can, and we tend to get so much back in return. I guess that would be my message of hope, gratitude, kindness, and social connection. I think that's all we have, and that's everything we need, quite frankly.
That's excellent, Lisa. Thank you very much for offering us that noteful hope from positive psychology. And even though I practice Stoic philosophy as my form of self-care, I have become evangelical about expressing gratitude and recording gratitude. Stoicism encourages journaling as a form of as a way of raising self-awareness and self-improvement, and I kind of add a conscious reflection of all the things I have to be grateful for, and it's amazing how positive that makes me feel. And what I found is that as time goes on, the negativity bias can kick in again, but then I have a document which I can go back to remind me of all the positive things that have happened to me recently. Things that I'm pleased about, proud of, and so forth. And then those positive feelings are restored. So I'm a great advocate of that. Thank you for sharing that practice. I have no further questions for you. I thought this would be an opportunity now for you first, Lisa and Tim, to perhaps share any further information you may wish to share with the audience, and then we can allow the audience the opportunity to ask any questions that they may have.
Lisa, do you want to go first this time?
Absolutely, thank you. I would highly recommend that anybody interested in the audience takes a look at the University of Pennsylvania's website. So this is the home of positive psychology. It has so many incredible resources, including the VIA Values in Action Signature Strength Survey that I spoke about before. So too does it have a measure of PERMA. So if you're interested as an individual or as a team, you can get to see what your level of well-being looks like, how that changes over time. There are so many fabulous resources on there that I think are really, really useful. Equally, I would love to connect with anybody on LinkedIn, so please do feel free to reach out. I would absolutely love to make new connections, and if I can help in any way, please do let me know. I have a website too. Sorry, is this the shameless promotion part, Paul?
Yes, we've reached the shameless promotion stage. Feel free.
Perfect. In which case, please reach out at thepositivepsychologist.com if you have any questions, or I can share any further resources or thoughts or help, and I'd love to hear yours in return. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. I greatly appreciate your input this evening.
Thank you.
And Tim, well, would you like to take the opportunity to indulge in a little shameless promotion too? I have read some of your books and they are excellent, so I'm willing to do the shameless promotion for you, but if you would prefer to do it yourself.
So, well, my website is www.timlebon.com, or if you Google Tim Lebon Stoicism or something, you'll get that. And there is a contact box you can get there if you want to ask me any questions or just get in contact. I've also got a newsletter where I'll put out details about courses I'm running, etc. So the book, as I said, is 365 Ways to Be More Stoic. And it's out in the States next month. It's out in the UK already. Also should mention the Stoic Air website, of course, Modern Stoicism, and the Aurelius Foundation. Those would be 3 websites I'd recommend to find out further. There was one thing else I wanted to recommend, which was another picture I've got, which is not shameless self-promotion, but an idea about how these two things go together. And I like this idea of a mountain where you approach flourishing in two directions, either through virtues or through perma, and then so they're not so much alternatives as well. I guess there are alternatives in this particular diagram, but they're equally valid alternatives. And I would say it's not quite accurate because the two can combine with each other. And if you do both, I think it's much better. But in terms of resources, there's this lovely article by Kesabir and Dina called A Virtuous Cycle, Virtues and Happiness, which happens to be open source. So if you Google that, you can download it for free. So I think it's a nice way to follow up the discussion we've had, very much in the vein of how positive psychology and Stoicism, and more broadly how psychology and philosophy cannot be kind of in separate camps, just going on their own little furrow, but can actually inform each other to help all of us flourish more.
Thank you, Tim. That was wonderful, and a really lovely way to end this evening's discussion, making it clear that what we're talking about here are two slightly different paths to the same destination, which is human flourishing, even in times of great adversity such as those we're experiencing at present. Again, I would like to take the opportunity to, on behalf of the audience, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Lisa, for your contributions this evening, which I found, which I thoroughly enjoyed and found extremely insightful. I'm sure that's true of the audience members too. But why don't we find out? Why don't we make use of the remaining time and give people the opportunity to raise their hands or unmute themselves and ask you both any questions they may have. Is that okay, everyone? Who's going to be brave enough to ask the first question? Michael?
Yeah. The negative bias idea, the Stoics have the meditation on worst case scenario as sort of a meditation, which is that in, what conflict is that relative to the positive side?
Are we talking about, is it premeditatio malorum?
Yes.
Yeah. The premeditation of evils, yes. And that's a visualization I often use. Some people find it quite negative. Actually, I find it to be the opposite. It helps me to prepare for the worst, and if the worst doesn't happen, so much the better. Tim, Lisa, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lisa that we have all got a negativity bias, but I think that negativity bias doesn't always serve us very well. So it often makes us avoid things and rather than think through them. And so my own premeditation or adversity practice involves thinking of something that might go wrong and then thinking about how best to deal with it, which would involve controlling the controllables, using the virtues, etc. Now, interestingly, in positive psychology, they've got this thing called WHOOP, which means wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. And this combines the two. It's lovely. It's one of the reasons I love positive psychology. The first bit sounds very much like Stoicism. No, sorry, the first bit sounds like positive psychology. What do I want to happen? And then envisaging it happening. Positive thinking, which you might say overcomes the negativity bias. The second bit is then a bit like the premeditation of adversity. What can go wrong and how can I overcome it? So that would be my answer.
And if I could just add there for a second, Tim, and I completely agree with that. I also think it's really useful to intercept the negativity bias as it's happening in that moment. And the way that I really love to do this is from Dr. Susan David's work. Again, she's the emotional agility lady, and I think she's fabulous. She talks about the fact that we've got to recognize and label thoughts and emotions for what they are. So actually to say, right now, I'm having the thought that, because in doing so, you're creating a separation between you and your thought. And that can be really useful because oftentimes, as I'm sure Tim will agree, people believe that everything they think is real and true, and that is not the case. And it's this other idea, you would do that with thoughts, but also with your feelings. And Susan David says that the more accurately you are able to label your feeling, you know, the precise nuance of your feeling, the better equipped you are to deal with that. Because if you can't say exactly what it is you're feeling, how can you know where it's coming from? How can you know what to do with it? So I think our real power perhaps comes in being able to intercept that thought, emotion, behavior cycle, which is continuously at play, especially in the thought stage. Tim, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
How was that, Michael? Were those responses helpful to you?
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask Tim or Lisa? It's not compulsory. I am, while I wait to see whether anybody else wishes to ask another question, I'd like to recognize all of the kind messages that have been put in the chat box and the gratitude people have expressed to Tim and Lisa for their what they've shared with us this evening, which I endorse as well, obviously. So any more questions?
Not a question from Australia, and I apologise for my camera, but I just want to say thank you. Absolutely worthwhile 5 a.m. start. So you set me up for a good day. So thank you very much. I really appreciate both of you and Paul for organising. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome, Catherine, and I admire your commitment to the course. 5 a.m. start, wonderful.
There is something in getting up early, I think. I mean, it's amazing, Catherine. I'm very, very in awe of what you've done. But again, it's one of the things that when I've run my positive psychology class, we talk about awe as another positive thing to aspire to. And I remember once getting up early, and it was in summer, to be honest, and going outside at about 5 o'clock and just listening to the bird song. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Yes, this morning it's the garbage pickup. So I've heard the garbage truck this morning. But yes, I agree. The birds are beautiful at this hour, I can tell you. Yes.
That's great, Catherine. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I realise that we're almost up, and I'm very grateful that that people have taken the time to share this experience with us. I'm deeply appreciative of your presence here this evening, and I hope you found something of value within it. I know I have. So again, as it seems there are no further questions, I would like to thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Tim, for all you've shared this evening.
Thank you.
It's been immensely valuable. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone who's attended also.